Hi, everyone. Welcome. Happy Tuesday. I'm Mallory. I'm one of the co-founders of the Inheritance Project alongside Katya and Ariel, who are here with me today. I'm really excited to be moderating this conversation on the art of challenging conversations and how to engage in productive dialogue across lines of difference. And before we dive into it, I want to welcome all of you here into this virtual space with us. I know that because of the way it's set up, you can see us, but we can't see you. However, we can read your comments. So we really love to know who's here. And if you have any questions or thoughts or reflections, we love hearing that in the comments as we go, and it will really help us guide the conversation. And first, before we start, actually, wherever you're joining us from, I want to invite us to take a moment to just arrive here. You're probably coming from another meeting, another activity, something else that you're doing today. So wherever you are, let's just take a couple deep breaths together to help us bring a little more oxygen and energy into our brain and become a little bit more fully present here. So if you're in a place where you can do this, you're welcome to close your eyes or lower your gaze and just take a moment to drop your attention inwards. We'll just take a few deep breaths together. First, breathing all the air out, breathing in deeply through the nose, exhaling, sighing it out. Let's do 2 more of those. Breathe in deep. Exhale, let it go with a sigh. 1 more. Breathe in deeply. This time, hold the breath at the top just for a moment. And then exhale, let it go. Empty all the way. Take a moment here, just allow your breathing to return to a natural flow in and out of your nose. Take a moment to just notice how you're feeling today. Any sensations or emotions that are present in your body. Give yourself a moment to acknowledge them, to arrive here in this virtual space with all of us. When you feel ready, if you like, you can take any gentle stretches or movements that feel good to you. And in a couple seconds, we will gently open our eyes and come back together, hopefully with a little more presence and energy. And I'm really curious to know who is here today listening into this conversation. And I'd love for you to write in the comments where you're joining from. And if you're here because you're struggling with a particular conflict or situation in your life. If you are dealing with a conflict at work, you can write the word work in the comments. If you are struggling with a conflict in your personal life, maybe with a family member, a friend, or someone else in your community, you can write the word home in the comments. So you can keep it really simple. Write the word work if you're interested in learning more about dealing with a professional conflict in your life. Write the word home if you're struggling with some kind of personal conflict with your friends or family. And then finally, if you anticipate having any kind of difficult conversation or divisive conversation with over the holiday season, either with family members or community members or anyone else, write the word holiday in the comments. So I'll give you all a moment to write in where you're joining from, work, home, or holiday. If any of those things resonate for you, you can write more than one. And while you do that, I also want to share that today we're really going to be focusing on conflicts and situations in our professional life and in our personal relationships. And we're going to be sharing some tools, specifically Inheritance Project's 7 skills for challenging conversations that can help you have really difficult conversations and address some of these issues in your life. And the caveat that I want to share is that these skills and these tools are not relevant or applicable to violent situations, abuse, or anything that is, physically violent. So these tools are really designed for conversations that can be addressed in a reasonable and safe way. And I also want to share that while we are have this scheduled until 1 p.m. Eastern, we are happy to stay on a little longer. If any of you have additional questions or additional things that you want to talk about, we will definitely make time and we'll stay on as long as we can to address all of that. I'm checking the comments. Looks like, wow, we have people from all over the world: Toronto, Ireland, New York, North Carolina. I love this global community. And we have a really good mix of people jumping in with conflicts at work and at home. And if you're one of those people who shared that, I do want to let you know that we are going to share more about our Bridge Builders course, which is an incredible 7-week program to help you address a specific issue in your life, where you can take the tools that we share today, dive deeper into them, and actually integrate them and make progress on your situation that you're dealing with. So we'll share more about that at the end. And if you stay until the end, you'll have the benefit of receiving a really special offer for that program too. So before we dive into the conversation, I just want to give also a quick introduction for those of you who are new to Inheritance Project and our work. We partner with leaders to create communities that love working together by building connection, empathy, trust, inclusion, and communication skills. So what that looks like is that we offer and lead inclusive leadership programming, leadership development training on conflict resolution and communication skills. We facilitate executive retreats and team building summits. We do all kinds of experiential learning programming to help organizations become resilient and have the skills that they need to thrive. And I want to define what we mean by inheritance, because sometimes when people come to our events for the first time, they sometimes think that we're talking about taxes or estate planning for wealthy individuals. And while, money and physical property is an important part of your inheritance, it's not all of it. And we use this definition of inheritance, which includes all the things that aren't tangible, that you don't necessarily see physically, like your culture, your beliefs, your values, stories, social conditions, traits, and perspectives received from past generations. And every individual has a unique inheritance. And so often our inheritance affects the way that we show up at work, in communication, in conflict. And yet we rarely take the time to actually understand our own inheritance, how it's affecting us as leaders, and also the inheritance of all the other people who we interact with, work with, and collaborate with. And we'll be talking more about our own inheritance in a moment. But first, since we're going to be using this term conflict a lot, I want to share how we're defining it for the purposes of this conversation, which is a struggle resulting from opposing needs, drives, wishes, or demands. And I share this definition because a lot of the times when we say the word conflict, our minds may immediately jump to war or violent conflict. And that is one type of conflict, but actually conflict happens in so many other ways that are much more subtle, usually. And conflict is an inevitable part of the human experience because we each have different identities. We each have a different, unique inheritance. It's natural that we each have different needs and wishes for our workplace, for our families, for our communities. And so inevitably, we are at odds and have to navigate how do we care for and make space for the different needs and desires of the people in our life when they may conflict with our own. So those are the types of situations that we'll be talking about today. And I I'm also defining terms is one of the tools that we actually use in a lot of our programs. And I'm curious if anyone here, you can write conflict in the comments if you've ever had a situation in your work or life where you've been in a disagreement with somebody or spent a lot of time arguing and then realized that the root cause of the conflict was actually that you were using the same word in different ways. So if you've ever had a situation like that, write conflict in the comments. It's something that we come across a lot, and this is one of the reasons why we like to get everyone on the same page with these definitions before we dive into the conversation. Now that we have set that context, I'm really excited to welcome my co-founders, Katya and Ariel, to the stage. And I'd love for you to introduce yourself and share what is one pattern that you inherited around conflict that you're working on transforming. And I'll pass the mic to you first, Katya.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to get to speak to you, even if we cannot see you. And thank you for writing in the chat. I love seeing all the comments come in and seeing who's here in the audience. I'm Katya Stepanov. My pronouns are she and her. And I was born in Minsk, Belarus, 4 days after the Soviet Union collapsed, and immigrated as a very young child with very young parents to New Jersey. And my parents, I love them so much. And they were very young and unprepared to be parents, especially in a country where they didn't speak the language, where we were immigrants who didn't have a lot of resources. So my early childhood was spent in a lot of fight or flight situations of survival, really just in survival mode with my parents. And as a result, I inherited a lot of toxic and challenging behaviors around conflict resolution. So you're asking about one, Mallory, and I'm like, oh, there's so many that I inherited from my early upbringing. And I say this not to shame or blame my parents at all. And I want to make that really clear. I'm really grateful to my parents, and I fully empathize with them because they did not have tools. These very tools that we're teaching now, they didn't have those tools. They didn't know how to model healthy conflict resolution in their early 20s as immigrants from the former Soviet Union in the United States. So one of the biggest patterns that I am working on in my life and have been working on over the course of my life, and that we work on in this course as well, is the urgency to respond to a situation. So, for example, I notice that someone is disappointed in me, or I notice that something has gone wrong, and feeling this physical urgency to resolve the conflict immediately, right? So that could look like writing a really long email back to someone who asked a question, right? Or it could be reacting right away in a slew of messages to something that's going on. So because I needed to urgently resolve conflicts in my early childhood, I inherited this pattern, and it does not serve me in my professional relationships, right? And in my relationships as an adult. So interrupting this pattern of urgency to respond to something, pausing, giving myself the space to regulate my nervous system through breath, which is one of our core tools in this program. So how can I regulate my nervous system so I move out of a fight or flight reaction into a space where I can really think about how I want to respond? And then being able to understand what are my unmet needs in a situation. Why am I responding in this way? What's going on in my body, so that I can actually formulate specific requests, so I can actually come back to the situation from a regulated place, having done my work, thinking through everything. So this is the process that we're teaching in this course. It's really helped me so much just to pause and breathe and give myself that space in which I can think about the right way to resolve the conflict. And again, I have a lot of compassion if you're listening to this and you recognize that you also have an urgency pattern that you inherited. That pattern is inherited because sometimes we really do need to urgently respond to things, right? Especially in a chaotic environment or when we're in danger. But when we learn that as our default behavior in conflict, it really gets in the way of resolving things from a compassionate and conscious place. So I would answer that that's the number one behavioral pattern that I inherited that I work on disrupting with the 7 skills. And I'll
Thanks,
pass it back to you.
thanks, Katya. I'll actually turn it over to Ariel with the same question. You're welcome to introduce yourself and share what is one inherited pattern around conflict that you are working on transforming right now.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Mallory. Thanks, Katya, for sharing that. So my upbringing was in a family where I had parents that were highly intelligent as well as highly intense. So, my dad's family is Puerto Rican, and in a Puerto Rican family, the kind of like regular level of volume is like shouting. And then on top of that, when you're in a conflict, that goes up a couple more notches. And I was I was modeled being in conflict in such a way where um, you would engage by dominating the other person, dominating dominating the conversation with anything at your disposal. So that could be dominating the conversation with your intelligence, with the tone of your voice, with the loudness of your voice, with your humor. Outwitting somebody and kind of engaging in that way as a tool to kind of level up, some sense of advantage. So that's what was modeled for me, and that's what I learned to do really well. Um, and in a situation, in a family conversation, this led to continuing escalation, and finding resolution when two people are doing that are very difficult. And furthermore, when that was taken out of the context of my home and brought into situations in a work environment, this did not bode well, because that, superimposing that into a situation where there's a person of authority that I'm dealing with, it creates a situation that puts me in an unsafe position and does not lead to resolution. So there's been a big part of my journey in transforming my approach to conflict has been to understand how to de-escalate, how to use a lot of the tools, and one of those tools was leading with curiosity, instead of trying to jump on top of the argument, really come from underneath and say, what is it, what is it that you're talking about? What is your perspective? And really inviting the other person into into the experience in a way that is safe, and that is creating a greater sense of empathy. So that's been a big part of my journey, and one that I've been practicing a lot as a student of these skills.
Mm. Thank you both so much, and for your openness and sharing about your backgrounds, and for normalizing this conversation about our inheritance and the context that we come from and how that actually affects us as a professional. It's really funny because once we got asked by a client, why can't we just learn communication skills? Like, why do we have to talk about who we are and where we come from, and explore that context? And for us, this is really what makes our work and our approach to these things, and communication skills training, really different than what's out there. Because yes, you can go learn a bunch of techniques without considering how they apply to who you are in your unique context. But my experience is a lot of the times then that doesn't really actually stick. And it's really hard to adopt a new way of doing things unless you understand, well, what am I doing already and why? And where does that come from? And and having that awareness is the first step to starting to change that. And both of you mentioned actually the 7 skills for challenging conversations, and I want to get into these. And we actually create or synthesize these from a lot of different studies and learnings that the three of us have done over the course of our life. They include our own studies. All of us our yoga teachers and meditation teachers, we've studied breath and the human nervous system, and also really noticed that this understanding was really lacking in a lot of professional trainings, which are supposed to help you, how to have really hard conversations without addressing, well, what's actually going on in your body and your brain when you're in a highly charged emotional or stressful situation. So there's a big element of somatics, embodiment, and our understanding of human physiology that are woven into this. As well as our studies of conflict resolution. I studied the sustained dialogue methodology of conflict resolution. All of us are students of nonviolent communication, and we draw on many incredible thinkers like Adrienne Marie Brown, Brene Brown, and many others, and brought a lot of this work together into this process that worked for us. And full transparency, one of the reasons that we created this framework is because we were actually struggling with conflict between the three of us and our own dynamic. And each of us had to come face to face with our own patterns and learn how to transform them in order to actually move forward as a founding team. So these are forged in the fire of our own experience. And like both Ariel and Katya shared, we're all students of these skills. We love to share in a way where we're sharing and learning together, because no one's perfect, especially not us. And we're really grateful for all of you for being here today and being part of this part of our learning journey. And so I want to ask you, Katya, how can you tell me more about one of these skills and how it has impacted your professional life?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mallory. And a theme that I heard across me and Ariel's shares today is a theme of listening, of learning how to listen, first to ourselves and then to the other person as well. And I think that listening is a skill that we don't frequently have very good role models for, and that we're not taught in school. And we're also not really taught this in a professional setting either. And so the skills that I draw on the most that have transformed my life and my leadership are the skills of pausing and breathing and learning to listen to myself. And in the listening to myself, so first of all, giving myself a chance to listen to myself, right? So when an activating event happens, let's say, use an example for entrepreneurs or managers or leaders, because I really think in the professional setting, this one shift in how you approach conflict and tension can change your relationship completely, which is, you're an entrepreneur, you have a million things to take care of, or you're managing lots of people, and a mistake was made, right? Or something didn't get delivered on time, or something happened and you need to find out what happened, who's accountable, who's responsible for it, right? So this seems like a very simple situation. And I'm sure some of you listening, how many of you have a story about somebody that you work with? If you have a story about someone you work with, like, oh, that person's always XYZ. They're always doing this thing. Oh, why aren't they, anything in this vein? I want you to write the word story in the comments. If you can recognize through listening to me, yeah, you know what? I have a story about someone I work with, whether it's your boss, your colleague, right? Somebody else at work. And when conflicts happen with that person or in that situation, what does our brain do? It immediately jumps to validate the story that we have about this other person. So in my experience, when I would have something that was missed, a deadline or something else that I'm responsible for, let's take it back to my childhood where I was not really allowed to make mistakes without severe punishment from my parents. As a result of that, I felt this intense need to make sure that whatever happened was not my fault and that I could make it really clear whose fault it was and how to avoid the situation in the future. That might be a great self-preservation technique, right? Oh, it's never my fault when a mistake happens. It's always this person's fault or this reason that it didn't happen, or, I'm going to get to the bottom of it. But that did not actually help me to be the kind of leader I really want to be in the world. And so the skill of pausing and breathing when something would happen, a mistake is made, right? I notice the mistake is made, the deadline is missed. I pause, I notice that I'm activated, and I write out my story. I actually give myself the time to write out what I think happened, my story about the other person, all of the things that the brain does automatically. And then I would look at that and turn that story into questions I could ask the other person. So, this is the third skill, leading with curiosity. How do I take the story that I have and say, how might I ask a question instead? For example, hey, person that I'm speaking to, I noticed that this deadline was missed. Can you tell me more? What happened there for you? So, right away, opening up the space for the other person to share with me what their experience is. And 90% of the time, what I learn is all the information I need to understand why this really happened, rather than approaching it from, I'm already convinced I know what happened. I already am convinced of my story about this person. And I'm not actually giving room for the other person to share with me their experience, what happened for them, so that I can understand where we're missing each other. So I'll stop there because there's so many other skills that would happen after that point, but just not sending that long answer or that long email, not jumping to blame the other person right away, and taking the space to understand my story and ask questions and lead with curiosity has completely transformed my leadership.
Thanks, Katya. I want to pass the mic to Ariel to share a story of how one of these skills have changed an interaction in your personal life. You're muted.
Thank you. Sure. So my experience with this is interesting because I actually, this past couple of months was actually taking the course itself. I was, we all designed this course together. Part of my role as chief experience officer is to help refine the program. So I was actually a participant in the program, and I was really blown away at the effect that it had on one of my kind of core fundamental relationships with it, which is with my mother. Um, and in short, what happened was, during this time, I was in the beginning stages of looking to buy a home, like buy my first home. And because of how my taxes were set up as an entrepreneur, I had asked my mother to be a co-signer, and she seemed really open to it. She seemed really to be on board. And then after talking with her financial advisor, she says, "Listen, I'm sorry I can't do this for XYZ reasons." And from that moment, I went like straight into my inherited conflict patterns. I started getting upset. I started getting loud. I started trying to create all the reasons why this was unjust and not part of, this, where that was out of line with our values as a family. And I was reminded by my co-founders to apply the 7 skills from this course to this conversation. And what I ended up doing was to first receive and acknowledge her share, which is the 4th skill that we teach. And at that point, um, it created a really profound shift. My mom said, "Ariel, uh, you have come to me in a very different way, and I see that you're approaching this conversation with a lot of maturity, and I feel really seen and heard." And she said, "I'm going to reconsider, and I'm going to investigate a little bit more." Um, and I approached it in that way, and I approached it with curiosity. And ultimately, what ended up happening, and kind of leading with curiosity, is another of the skills, is the 3rd skill that we teach. And in doing so, what eventually came about was to uncover that this was actually going to put her in a financially risky situation. That although I'm young and, I have a higher tolerance for risk, she's entering the last chapter of her life and needs to have a financial situation that's very stable. And so, a lot of people might have moved through that conversation the same way that I started, and come out on the other side with what is known as justifiable resentment, which is resentments that they have every right to hold inside them because they believe they've been wronged, and perhaps they were in their view of the situation. But instead of letting that manifest, by using these skills, I was able to come to an understanding of a deeper understanding of her situation, and actually be able to guide us into a deeper connection, where we're both taking care of each other. And ultimately, I will be able to buy the home and by other means. But what I have is a deeper relationship with one of the core people in my life. And so this was a really profound shift in our relationship that was directly related to the application of these tools.
Mhm. Thank you. And I'll just put up the 7 skills again. I know we've been name dropping all the different skills, and these seem like really short little phrases on this one slide, but behind each of them is a huge huge amounts of research and data and methodology and practices that you can actually put in place, and scripts that you can actually use in your real life conversations. And one of the things that your story reminded me of, Ariel, is one of the quotes from Marshall B. Rosenberg, who wrote Nonviolent Communication. He has a quote that goes along the lines of, "We can't win at somebody else's expense." Like, a true solution has to be one that works for everyone. And I notice that so often I notice these dynamics in workplaces where, we might just agree to something even though we don't really think it's a good idea, because there's not real space for dialogue there. And so I think, even though you shared a personal example, it's really relevant to a lot of situations and issues that happen in workplaces. I think can be avoided if we took the time to actually lead with curiosity, understand what the other person's actual needs are, and then come with creativity to find a solution that works for everyone involved. And I want to zoom out a little bit, because obviously there's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot of global crises happening right now. And I am curious to hear from you, Katya, why you think these skills are so essential right now at this moment in human history, and what would be the impact if all of us learned these skills and started applying them.
Yes, it's a big question, so I'll do my best to answer it. But what I'll say is, we do live in a culture of urgency and of immediacy right now. And as we see global conflicts now playing out on social media, I'm sure I'm not alone in feeling despondent when I look at a comment section these days and I see people who are dysregulated in their nervous system and activated and trying to do something or resolve something that is so contextual and complex through a comment section, for example, right? Or through means that are not actually going to lead them to the goal they really have and the values that they really have. So one of our philosophies at Inheritance Project is really start with yourself. It's so tempting to see the conflicts that are going on in the world and say, I want to do something about that, this external conflict that exists outside of me. However, what happens when we turn that around and actually turn the spotlight on ourselves and say, what about the conflicts within me? First of all, what about the conflict inside of me? What about the conflict in my immediate circle, with my immediate circle of colleagues, coworkers, friends, and family members? Because that's the place in my life that I can have the biggest impact. And I truly believe if every single individual decided that they were going to focus on themselves, what are the conflict patterns that each of us has inherited from our unique upbringing? Which of those patterns gets in our way of resolving conflict with the people who influence our life the most, right? The 5 people we spend the most time with, the people we work with, the people in our family, the people in our community where we have a real meaningful impact. What if I start there? And if I can master turning conflict into connection in my relationships, with my coworkers, with the people in my community, then that ripple will move out farther and farther. So if every single individual was actually doing this work for themselves, we would change the world without needing to externalize, right? Without needing so many of the things that we see going on right now and that honestly are distracting us from resolving the real conflicts in our life. And I'll call back to Adrienne Marie Brown when she talks about transformative justice. How can we advocate for transformative justice at a systemic level if we don't have the skills and tools to practice these things in our interpersonal relationships? And the same is true for conflict. So if we have a culture of toxicity and immediacy where we don't learn really good skills and ways of turning conflict into connection, then we're going to focus so much on transforming culture in all of the ways that are positive. So if you're listening to this and thinking about the culture in your workplace, and it's like, well, culture work is about the team building activity that I do with my team, or it's about, the happy hour that we're all going to go to, or it's about any of those things that are helping people connect outside of the actual work they do, that's not really going to change culture in your company, because the culture in your company is made up of behaviors and how people behave with each other while they're doing work. And work is full of conflict. It's full of tension, and it needs to be for the sake of innovation. So if we're bringing all of our dysregulation and dysfunction from our inherited conflict patterns into our work environment, that's what really needs to be addressed to transform the culture as a whole. So I really see it as turning the lens on ourselves and knowing that that is the most empowering way that we can live our lives. It just takes one person to break a pattern. One person has to do something differently, and that person could be you. So what will the impact be if you change the way you approach conflict, and then see how that ripple moves out beyond you into the world around you?
Thank you, Katya. Very inspirational. And I'm curious to hear from folks who have been listening so far. What are some of the insights or phrases even that have stood out to you or made an impact on you from this conversation so far? I'd love for you to share something short in the comments. This is what I've sometimes heard called favorite frames by a women's empowerment coach, Kasia Urbaniak, who I follow. And so write your favorite frames or insights or nugget that has resonated with you in the comments. I'd really love to hear what's been speaking to you so far. And if you have any questions or anything that's on your mind that you want us to address or go deeper into or talk more about, please also write those in the comments as well. And I want to pass the mic over to you, Ariel, now, because you recently participated in our Bridge Builders program, and we have another course open for enrollment starting this spring. The early bird special is on now until the end of the year. So I'd love for you to come on and share a bit more about the program, who is it for, and what people would get out of it.
Sure. I remember at the end of this course, me and Katya kind of looked at each other and had the same thought at the same time, that we just were re-inspired by the work that we're doing, and feeling that everybody involved had such a profound experience, including myself, including both of us, and it's been such a privilege to actually take the course. Who's this course for? The way that I would respond is to say it's for those who are leaders and those who need to be leaders. And so what that means is that some of us may be in formal leadership positions, whether we may be on a C-suite, we may be a manager, we may lead a team, we may be an entrepreneur, but we also may need to be a leader in another way. We may not be in a formal leadership position, but we may need to step into that role to take care of a relationship or to take care of a group. That could be someone who is a family member. That could be someone who's a friend. That could be someone who is dealing with a situation that needs someone to guide the situation into a different outcome, or into a different pattern. Um, and so this course is for those leaders who are looking to use creativity to find new solutions, to leave a positive legacy behind them. We call the folks in our course bridge builders, and this is very intentional because, as Katya was mentioning, we're in a situation, socially and culturally, that defaults to debate and to the very patterns that I was describing. I learned about escalation, and so we're teaching folks to look at conflict as a way to get both people to the other side. I was thinking about this earlier today, that sometimes, even when we're trying to do the right thing, we say, well, let me take the high road. And this sounds great, but we often will put ourselves on a moral high ground and kind of go off on our own, saying, well, I'm going to leave them behind. Bridge builders is about saying, no, we want both people to get to the other side and create a new relationship and a new way of being together. So to that point, this program is for folks who are in a conflict at work, or in a situation where there's a pervasive tension that needs to be resolved, and that could be in professional settings, and in personal settings, in your social circles. And the last thing I'll mention, for the sake of time, is that this is also a way for us to look into our own inheritance. So it's not just about learning the skills; it's actually about understanding what we're bringing from our upbringing, from how society has trained us, to the foreground, to really investigate that and understand what are the things that we can transform to show up in a better way for us and for all the people that we're in relationship with.
Mm. Thank you. And Katya, tell me a bit more about what makes this program unique, because there are so many online courses, so many leadership programs out there. Why this?
Well, first of all, we are not here to say, take this 2-hour workshop and you will know how to resolve all the conflicts in your life, right? Watch this one TikTok video about conflict pattern and suddenly you're an expert in conflict. I really see this so much right now in our culture and in our world. This quick fix thing. Oh, I'll just read this bestseller book and it'll teach me everything I know about conflict. What makes this course different is that we recognize that conflict occurs in relationship. It's a relational pattern. So if you want to change your default conflict pattern, you need to practice that in relationship. So first and foremost, we're bringing a community of people together, all of whom are working on their own individual problem. But because you're partnered and paired and in a group format, you actually have a safe space with people who are not involved in your conflict to try these skills with, to practice, to process, to talk to actually not be alone in the transformation of these patterns in your life. So first and foremost, it's about bringing these new tools into a relational environment where you really get to practice. That's the first difference. The second is it's an integrative program where we're taking 7 weeks to learn these skills. We're diving really deep into them. We have dialogue, we have room for nuance and context and exploration. We're not reducing down really intricate and complex ideas into a single post. And if you are someone who is frustrated that you've been reading all this stuff online and it's not translating into real change in your life, that's because it's not possible, right? So don't be so hard on yourself. You really need to actually have the time to integrate these tools. So the second thing that makes this course different is the length of time and the real time commitment from the people who really use these tools in their life moving forward. The third difference is we don't approach this just on an academic level. It's not just about reading. It's not just about writing. It's about how do these behaviors live in your body. And what can you do about that? How can you explore where these patterns live in your body through science-based research and breath work and all different types of somatic practices that address the soma, which means the body, and where everything is stored in our bodies. And then the final thing I'll say is there's no one size fits all answer in our program. Each person's situation is unique, and we have integration sessions in between our live workshops where we do hot seat coaching on the real issues that everyone in our cohort is facing. So you get to bring your problem and say, I'm workshopping how to approach this. This is how I want to talk about this. Give me input, right? So real space to actually workshop the way that you're approaching your conflict and get insight from the entire community and us as coaches. And finally, what makes this unique is the workbook and the guidebook that we give you to accompany this course. If you join this cohort, you're going to forevermore have a step-by-step guided process anytime that you feel triggered or activated that you can now guide yourself through. And then by virtue of that, model that for the people in your life, your children, your community, your colleagues. And I promise you, we've had so many incredible testimonials from the group that just completed this course. They say things like, I thought this was going to help me at work, but it saved my marriage. Or, I thought that this was just going to be a leadership training, but actually I have people coming up to me now saying, wow, I saw how you handled that differently. Teach me, coach me, right?
Mm.
And one of the amazing things about this program is if you do complete the training and you do all the coursework, you get certified as well. So you get a certification that you can share with your community to inspire other people to learn these tools. And again, be part of that change, you being that individual that helps to change the world around you.
Mm. Thank you so much, Katya. I want to close by inviting each of you to share your number one piece of advice or tip for those people here who are listening who are dealing with some kind of conflict or challenging conversation upcoming. But before I get into that, I want to share some of the logistics. So this next round of Bridge Builders Conflict Resolution and Inclusive Leadership Program begins next spring. The first session is on March 28th, and the live Zoom sessions will be held on Thursdays at 5 p.m. Eastern, almost every week with one week off. All the sessions will be recorded, although we highly recommend that you come to them live because you will be doing in-person activities and integration and small group dialogue. It's all experiential learning. So being there live is really, really valuable. Although if you do need to miss one for some unavoidable reason, you'll have the recordings, which you can reference forevermore. You'll also be added to our online learning and community portal where you have tons of resources, your coursework, and a chance to really connect with the community of other leaders who are part of the program and who are part of this new change, this new wave of leading in a more conscious way, of breaking down hierarchy and of acknowledging the human elements that we bring to the workplace. So if you want to be part of a community of other leaders like us, like the other people who are writing in the comments and listening in, if you feel like you need that support system to grow into the type of leader that you want to be, this is an amazing place for you to be a part of. And currently we have an incredible early bird offer on. The regular price of the program is $950 for the full 7-week course and all the sessions and all the resources. But the right now we have almost 40% off until the end of the year. So you can sign up for just $595. And we're giving all of you here, since you came today, an extra special bonus, which is especially useful for those of you who are dealing with a particular situation that you need support with. If you register and enroll for the course before the end of the day tomorrow, Wednesday, December 13th, you'll receive a free one-on-one coaching session with one of us to work on that particular issue or challenge as part of your program. So if you are seeking that kind of support, don't delay. Now's the chance to get an incredible deal on this really comprehensive program and also get some really tailored support for for your situation. The other thing that I'll share is we love bringing teams together from particular workplaces to take the course together. We've had groups join in the past, a group of 4 or even up to 10 people or more from the same workplace. So if you know that you want to bring your whole leadership team or your whole group to be part of this together, it's an incredible team building activity for your, as well as professional development. What we can do is 1, offer you a group discount for a team of 3 or more, and 2, make sure that you're part of the same small group pod. You'll be in a pod of 3 to 4 people throughout the course of the program, and this will be your support system for the entirety of the Bridge Builders course, that you'll be doing activities with them, learning together, giving each other feedback, practicing the skills together. And so being in a pod is a really amazing way to develop deeper and closer working relationships, and also really understand each other's communication styles in a deeper way. So if that appeals to you, please get in touch with me, Mallory. You can send me a direct message on LinkedIn or email me, mallory@inheritanceproject.org. And if you have any questions about Bridge Builders, feel free to put them in the comments. We're happy to stay and answer them for those of you that are curious, or feel free to message us afterwards as well. And for now, I want to close passing it to you, Ariel. What is one piece of advice or a tip that you have for someone who may be in the midst of some kind of conflict right now?
The number one thing that I would give to someone who's in a conflict, and this would be for a conflict that you're engaged in in the moment. The first thing that you do is our first tool is to pause and breathe. Right when you're about to do exactly what you always do, just stop and take a breath. And 2 things will happen. One is that your reactive nature will just will soften, and you'll become present, and you'll realize that you actually have a lot of different options in the way that you want to respond, as opposed to the reaction that may want to come out immediately. The second thing that's going to happen is that the other person is going to be affected by that same emotional transaction, and they will be confused because they're going to be expecting that reaction. They're going to be expecting to engage in a certain way because we've all been conditioned to do so. So they will, more often than not, when you pause and breathe, the other person is taken off guard, and actually will end up showing up differently as well. And if you pause and breathe, this can honestly transform the entire rest of the conversation. So if you do one thing, and if you take one thing with you from this live, practice and experiment with pausing and breathing in the midst of a conversation, in the midst of a conflict. This was really the inspiration for these skills. If it wasn't for these skills, you might not be here, because Inheritance Project may not exist at this moment. Shout out to our mediator, Shay. So again, this is not blanket advice. There's a lot of nuance to it, and really encourage all of you to take the course if you find this of interest and of value to you.
Thanks, Ariel. Same question to you, Katya. What's some words of parting wisdom that you want to leave with this group, especially if they're dealing with a particular situation or conflict in their own life?
Well, those of you who are still here, stay to the end. I want to give you 2 juicy tips that we go into much deeper in the course, but I still think at a high level, they would be really valuable to you. The first is receiving and acknowledging what someone is saying when they are upset. Okay, so this is about, you're in a situation and someone starts, let's say, ranting or talking at length about what is upsetting them. One tool that you can use is truly listen to what they're saying and see if you can identify what values this person has, what needs do they have. So rather than listening to the words they're saying, and the actual emotions that are coming out of them, can you challenge yourself to look deeper and listen for what are the needs they have? What are the values they have? And then can you reflect that back to them? So one of the tools we teach is a game called What I Heard You Say Is. And you might be listening to someone. So maybe let's say you try this out with a friend who's venting to you. Okay. You're on the phone, someone's called you and they're like, don't get me started about blah, blah, blah. And they start ranting about this, whatever situation it is. Instead of just listening and maybe tuning out while they're doing that, see if you can, at the end of that, say, thank you for sharing that with me. What I heard is that you really care about X and you really value Y. And one of the needs that I'm hearing that isn't being met for you right now is ABC. Did I get that right? I promise you, if you listen to someone in this way, it might be the first time that they've ever been listened to like that. And they may say, wow, yes. Or they might say, no, you totally got that wrong. Here's what I really value. Here's what I'm really saying. Because most of us speak in draft. No, none of us are speaking in the final draft of what we're trying to say, especially not in conflict. So when you recognize that you're actually on the same team and what you want out of a conflict is to both get to the other side. I love that, Ariel, so much, right? Not I leave you behind or I'm on the higher ground and you're on the lower ground, but we're both crossing the bridge. You can help that person cross the bridge by helping them see and hear themselves, what they really care about, what their real values are, what they really need that they're not receiving in that moment. And that kind of listening is an art, right? So it's something that we practice in this course. But even just taking that away from this conversation, next time you hear someone venting or ranting, listen for what they really care about and see if you can reflect that back to them and see how that changes the dynamic of your relationship and what they were telling you about in the first place.
Thanks, Katya. That actually makes me think about something that I've been reflecting on a lot, which is the rise of AI and the huge advancements in technology and how the world of work is really changing, because we are in this technological revolution right now. And actually, so much of what all of us do at work, our tasks, our responsibilities, our skills, in 10 years from now may not actually be relevant or needed because there are technology to automate it for us. So what is never going to be able to be automated are these kinds of skills of being listened to empathetically by another human and being in a co-creative dialogue. These kinds of leadership skills are very nuanced and they're much harder for a machine to be able to learn because they require spontaneous creativity in the moment. So the piece of advice that I'll leave you with is to think about your career from the long term. How can you be really resilient? How can you make sure that you're valuable and that you have the skills that you need to thrive in the future, as things have changed so much in the last 3 years and they're going to continue to change and transform in a really rapid way? The more that we can build our capacity to lead and our human skills, what's sometimes called soft skills, but is actually the hardest skills, the more you'll be as a professional. And we will pause to address questions, but I'm curious, before everyone has to go at the top of the hour, if anyone has any other favorite frames or insights or nuggets of reflection that they want to share in the comments, we'd love to hear them. I see that a lot of people were resonating with leading with curiosity, pausing and breathing, starting with yourself and your immediate circle, and before moving outwards, and then writing out your own story so that you can parse out what's your story and what are the real observable events that happened. So those are some of the frames that were shared so far. I'm curious if anyone has any others before we go. And there is one question in the comments that I'd love for us to address as people write those in, which is, what happens if you pause and actually that loses the momentum of the conversation? If the other person just walks away or it somehow disrupts the flow of the exchange. I'm curious, Katya or Ariel, if you have any questions if you have any reflections on this, if either of you want to jump in.
Yeah, well, I feel like this doesn't need to be like a pause, let's sit down and have a meditation session. This can be like a quick like moment, and you can actually preface it and say, give me 1 second, I want to think on that, and just breathe, and just take a couple moments to breathe, and just have that short moment for yourself, and that can be enough to change the energy. um so yeah, we can think about it. We can think about it as like as a moment to create a little bit of space. And this is essentially what the same thing as that we experience when we meditate. We kind of separate ourselves from the immediacy of the experience and give a little bit of space to observe it and be able to have some different to realize how can I respond consciously with that space that I've made. So yeah, so it can be a short pause, but one that both people feel nonetheless, um, can be incredibly powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. And this is about disrupting the culture of urgency again. That if we're in an escalating conflict and one of us stops to breathe and the other person hangs up the phone on us or walks away from the interaction, that's great because it means that person is not in a nervous system regulated state. They're not in a state in which they could actually resolve conflict with you anyway. And some conflicts cannot be resolved right in the moment that they're happening. And we need to get out as a society from this culture of it needs to be fixed right now or it's over, right? We can create the space that's necessary to come back to that conflict more consciously. So if you are pausing to regulate your own nervous system and the person on the other side of the conflict removes themselves from the situation, then maybe it's good and you can come back to it another time when both of you can approach it more consciously. So sometimes that happens too, and that's okay. And we need to look at conflict from not just it needs to all be fixed right now into a broader sense of this is a relationship. So I can always come back to it again and again from a new place.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. It looks like there aren't any other questions in the comments. If you do have any other questions about bridge builders, about anything we talked about, feel free to write it in now or send us a message. For those of you who are still here, we want to close with a closing visualization. And if you're in a space where you are able to take a moment to pause and close your eyes, you're invited to do so. Obviously, if you are out and about in the world or driving, be safe, take care of yourself. But for those of you who can take a moment to pause, draw your spine up tall, close your eyes or lower your gaze, bring your attention inwards, and start to pay attention to your breath. Taking a few deeper, slower breaths, noticing how the breath feels in your body as you breathe. Perhaps you feel your belly expanding, your lungs filling with air as you inhale, and your lungs emptying, your ribs relaxing, your belly receding as you exhale. Just paying attention for a few moments to those sensations. And from this place of awareness, I want you to imagine putting into practice one of these skills, one of the techniques that we've talked about in your life. And imagine what kind of impact that could have on your relationships, your workplace, the type of situations that you're dealing with. Imagine how you want to transform some of the patterns that you may have been stuck in. Imagine what could be on the other side. And take a few deep breaths, breathing in that vision, that feeling of a new way. And as you do that, start to rub your palms together. Take a deep breath in And then blow that vision between your palms. Hold it for a second, and then we'll, on the count of 3, clap it together into reality, symbolically. 3, 2, 1. Beautiful. Thank you all so much for being here, for sharing your thoughts and reflections and questions in the comments. It's always such a joy to share with you all. And we look forward to reconnecting with you all soon and hopefully learning alongside you in Bridge Builders this spring.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thanks so much for being with us.